Good afternoon and welcome back, ladies, gents and Pikachu, after a long delay, to another analysis and breakdown of the Qur'an of the Muslims! Yes, we're back once again to break this thing down verse by verse into factual logical statements in English so that you and I can understand who or what is Allah Akbar, what does he mean by the contents of his book here, and more importantly for us as non-believers, how does this affect us in our lives today? So before I start, as I always do, I'm going to kindly ask you if you have any doubts as to my factual accuracy or the things I'm about to say, please first buy and read one of these, a Tajweed Qur'an with meanings translated into English. And once you have done so, you will recognise every single word I'm about to tell you now is 100% true of the words of Allah in his book and what Muslims believe today. So don't let them deny it, don't let them fool you and deceive you like they are described to be doing in this book. If they call themselves Muslim, this is what they believe. So, with that in mind, let's carry on. Last time, if you've been keeping up with the series, you'll remember that Allah promised he was going to guide his Muslims in the straight way, the straight path towards the judgment day and then creating the paradise, but kind of got a bit waylaid, having a go at the Jews, and now he is talking specifically to, O children of Israel, the people of Moses. I think what's happened, even though he hasn't described this bit yet, they've escaped from Egypt via Moses and God's miracles, and he's now telling them what to do even though they've escaped and they don't like him at all. So that's the context where we're going to pick up from, and we are going to pick up from verse number 58 of Al-Baqarah, the heifer. This is what the page looks like. This is the bit we're going to be reading through now. So let's begin. 58. And remember, we said, we being Allah's angels talking to Moses, we said, enter this town and eat there plenty therein as ye wish, but enter the gate with humility in posture and words, and we shall forgive you your faults, and increase those who do good. End of verse. So, straight away we can see that Allah is up to his old deceitful tricks again, trying to mislead you by planting a false memory in your head. If we break this down, and remember, so he's saying to Moses, remember, I've told you this before, which he absolutely hasn't. And remember we said, i.e. not just me, says Allah, the angels also said this to you, Moses, says Allah to the reader. So it's a little bit convoluted. What he's basically doing, he's saying to you, the reader, remember the story of Moses, that was in the last bit. Remember the story of Moses, which you already know. So I'm telling it to you now, says Allah. In the story, he's saying to Moses and the Jews, remember that we said this to you. So there's lots of remembering things which didn't actually happen. And the thing that didn't actually happen is Allah saying to Moses, enter this town which you haven't built yet. You know, Israel, because they've just escaped from Egypt. Enter Israel that you haven't built yet. And therein eat as plenty as you wish. But enter the gate with humility. Like, don't be proud that you just escaped from Allah. Allah's saying he's letting you escape, even though a minute ago he was saying, you filthy ape Jews, I'll kill you all, and he was really angry that they escaped. Now he's saying, no, I just let you get away. Secret agent Allah, he's too smart for you. That's what he's saying to Moses, who at that time was basically one of the most powerful men on earth, who could command miracles through the power of God. I mean, Allah can't even make a prediction of who he's going to kill. He can't even kill his own slaves. His slaves all just escaped from Egypt, and half his army got killed. But anyway, we'll carry on. Then Allah says to Moses, enter the gate with humility in posture and words, and we shall forgive you your faults and increase those who do good. End of verse. So Allah is saying, now that you've escaped Egypt and you're going to go and set up Israel, go with my blessings, go humbly, but remember, only say what words I gave you. Only say Quran stuff. If you do that, and you do the posturing, you know, the prostrating with your butt up in the air and your head on the ground and all that stuff that Islam people do, then we shall forgive of you your faults and increase those that do good. So is he saying I'll increase your faults if you do good? No, he just has very badly worded it. He's saying he will increase your fortune, your luck, if you do the Islam stuff when you build Israel and you go through the gate, if you do the Quran stuff, which we know they never did, that they were completely against. So that's what that means. A bit of a weird start from Allah the Merciful, the Great Galah. So anyway, we'll move on. 59. But those transgressors changed the word which had been given to them. So we sent on the transgressors a plague from heaven, for that they infringed our command repeatedly. Those naughty evil Jews. I added that bit. So 59, if we break it down, but the transgressors changed the word which had been given to them. So now Allah is claiming, while they were slaves in Egypt and they already had a word, they already had a God, they already had a book that was way older than the one he's just about to write but hasn't written yet. He is saying the Jews are transgressors because they escaped out of Egypt to being free and set up Israel. They're transgressors who are going to get a plague from heaven from Allah, and the reason he's doing this plague is because, and I quote, they changed the word that had been given to them. So now Allah is saying somebody gave him a word. He didn't say it was him, but he doesn't agree with it. He's saying, I don't like that word, you've changed it, you haven't done it properly, Jews, so your word's wrong. So he's basically saying here, O children of Israel, now that you've escaped and I can't do anything about it, it was all part of the plan. Go with my blessing. But remember, when you go through the gate to Israel, only do Qur'an stuff because your word has been changed by you guys and is actually wrong. My word that I'm going to write in future and give to Muhammad in about 1,000 years' time, that's the one you need to follow. So I think we can tell Allah is trying to outsmart himself here. He's trying to tell Moses, only read that book which hasn't been written yet. The one that's going to be written in 532 AD, and it is now currently 850 BC. So in about 1,000 years' time, Moses, only read that book. Your one's wrong according to that one, which isn't written yet. If you don't believe me, buy it and read it to yourself. It's this bit here. And thusly we can tell already, just in those first 2 verses, Allah has got a vague idea of how time works. But he's too frothy-mouthed and angry and racist towards the Israelites, and specifically Moses for leading the people out of Egypt, to consider the things that he's saying. And this is the same plight that the Muslims have today. The Muslims have to make excuses for this, and they have to rewrite history to fit into this book, because history doesn't fit this book. And we know the reason they do that, although I don't have it to hand, is in the reliance of the traveller. Rule number 8, they have permissible lies. And the first permissible lie is, you're allowed to lie as long as it props up what is in this book here, the Qur'an of the Muslims. So Allah is using a permissible lie here by saying to Moses, your book's wrong. Actually, my book is right. He's lying to you. He's not lying to Moses there. Well, he's lying to Moses as well. But the permissible lie Allah is telling is to you, the reader, in the current day, by making you believe Moses has the wrong words in his book. His book's wrong, from whoever gave it to him. And actually the right book is the one that Muhammad is going to write in 1,000 years' time. But obviously we know how a clock works, Allah, so we're not going to accidentally forget those 1,000 years happened. And since you, in your own words, said Moses already had the book by the time you met him, perhaps it's actually more accurate than your book in the future. Just saying. And we move on. That's what that means. 60. And remember, Moses prayed for water for his people. We said, strike the rock with thy staff. Then gushed forth therefrom 12 springs of water. Each group knew its own place for water, so eat and drink of the sustenance provided by Allah, and do no evil nor mischief on Islam. End of verse. So, the plot kind of thickens. I feel like Allah is still making excuses for his last one. He knows you're going to have questions. If you're a Muslim, you're not, because he's told you in Al-Fatra, don't have doubts or questions, or off in your head, you're dead, just worship Allah. So you're not going to have these questions if you're a brainwashed person, a Muslim. But if you're anyone else on earth, you're going to think, hang on a minute, this doesn't make any sense, Allah. This doesn't make any sense, Allah. Why are you commanding Moses now, after a minute ago you were threatening to kill him when you kicked him out of Egypt because he escaped? And why are you saying your book is better than his when your book isn't going to be written for like 10 generations? And hasn't even been started yet. How do you know his book's wrong, Allah? You said his God didn't exist, so technically you shouldn't have a book. But you said he changed it. You didn't say it wasn't real, didn't exist. You didn't say his God wasn't real, did you, Allah? No. You specifically said, and I quote, which you had changed. Changed the word from which had been given to them. So who gave him the word which he had before he met you? And why is it so important to keep it accurate? Why are you having a go at Moses for having changed the words of it? Perhaps Allah's recognising in verse 59, there is a God who is real, who Moses has been worshipping, who wrote his book for him, the Old Testament. And Allah wants to deceive Moses out of using that book, which he won't be able to do, which is why they've managed to escape. And now he wants to deceive us in the current day using this trashy, evil book into thinking that the previous book, the Old Testament, is wrong when he knows it's actually right. He said so himself. He said the reason it's bad is because Moses has changed it. So therefore, if Moses didn't change it, it's accurate. In the words of Allah. That's what that means. Oh, it brings such a load of joy to me to know that this book is so full of plot holes. It's basically Swiss cheese in literary form. So anyway, that's that. Let's carry on. Oh yeah, and then he says, strike the rock with thy staff. So he's talking to Moses. He says, strike the rock with thy staff, and then loads of water's going to come out. And we know from the Old Testament, you know, the one that supposedly was changed by Moses from God, even though he hasn't admitted that, he said it in the text. What happens in the Old Testament is Moses waves a staff over a rock and commands with words, rock, give me water. And then the rock gives him water. In fact, the only time when Moses doesn't do this, when he disobeys God. God says, command the rock with words, and it doesn't immediately do it. So Moses gets impatient and goes, come on, rock, give me bloody water, or something like that. And then the water comes out, but God is angry at Moses and says, you disobeyed me in front of everyone there. So God is trying to tell Moses, you're supposed to be leading by example, Moses. And the example is you negotiate with the rock, you tell the rock exactly what it should do, and it does it, then you reward. But you didn't do that, did you, Moses? No, you used violence by whacking the rocks, and now you're not allowed in Israel. And Moses doesn't ever get into Israel because of that and never sees the promised land. So that is the teaching of God in the book which Moses allegedly has changed. But the change is in this one, because now Allah is telling Moses that he should be striking the rock. That's the example he should be giving the people. Use violence, whack them on the head, then they will do what you tell them. And then gushed forth therefrom 12 springs. Each group knew its own place, and everything was provided by Allah. So do no evil or mischief on Islam. Now, isn't it interesting how he got the book timing wrong? He got the Moses changing the book wrong. Then he said my book's better, even though it hasn't been written for 1,000 years. Now he's saying, don't do any evil nor mischief upon Islam. Islam hasn't been created yet. They're worshipping Allah, these guys who are the pre-Islamic culture. They're Allah worshippers, but they are not called Islam yet. So does this give us a little indication that whoever is writing this book is writing it in the Dark Ages, i.e. not back then when Allah claimed that his angels gave it down, and it is in context of the time it was written, i.e. 500 BC to 600 BC, the Dark Ages. So this completely falsified account, which is looking back, and then we know the reason why this account is being falsified is to throw shade on the book of Moses, you know, so they can have a go at the people of the book. See, it all makes sense if you add all the little tidbits, all the little clues that this guy leaves in his book, all the little lies, you add them together, and we know Allah wants to usurp the place of the Jewish God because he's very jealous of him. The reason he's jealous of him is because the Jewish God loves humans but doesn't love him as much. The way he's going to do this, because he admits he can't actually do anything against God, so he's going to get God's children. And now we see an example of how he is instructing his people through violence, whereas God said, command them with words. And we'll carry on, that's what that means. 61. Oh, we're back to the old, and remember, so he's trying to plant lots of lies on this page, so keep in mind there is a more accurate version of this in the Old Testament back there. We will go through that in a future episode. 61. And remember we said, O Moses, you cannot endure one type of food always. So beseech thy Lord for us to produce for us of what the earth groweth, pot herbs, cucumbers, garlics, lentils, and onions. Moses said, will you exchange better for the worse, though? These aren't good. Go ye down to any town, and you shall find what you want. And they were covered with humiliation and misery. They drew on themselves the wrath of Allah. This is because they went on rejecting the signs of Allah and slaying his messengers without cause. This is because they rebelled and they were transgressing. End of verse, end of reading. So a little bit of a long verse there. I feel like that has two verses kind of crammed together. And we know this is reconstituted from Uthman's compilation. So this isn't Likely, this is Daily Corvid opinion here, this is likely not what the original manuscript would have said. Bearing in mind 50, 59, 60 are all very compact verses. Then you get to 61 and it's like 2 compact verses linked together with one sentence taken out. That's how it looks to me. So, if we break it down, before we end the video, and remember ye said. So now, the angels are saying to Allah, remember you said this to Moses? So we kind of changed a bit. Now he's not speaking to you, speaking to the angels. Remember you said, O Moses, we cannot endure any kind of food always. Oh no, what's happening? We said is the children of Israel saying to Moses. So that's the narrative. Now, this is... In the narrative, this is so ridiculous. Now, the children of Israel, the Israelites who have escaped Egypt and they're about to set up Israel, they are talking to Moses. Moses has given them, water out of a rock and led them to food, which weirdly enough had to have been grown because it's described as vegetables. So I think what's happening here is the Israelites have kind of started to set up Israel. They farmed they farmed for a few years to make food. They've got 2 years behind them. And now the Israelites are saying to Moses, "Oh Moses, we cannot endure one kind of food always. We're getting bored of just eating the same old thing. We want more food. So beseech thy Lord for us to produce what the earth groweth." So they're saying, why don't you ask your Lord to give us better food? Because we're not happy with the food we've got, O Moses. That's what the Israelites are saying, according to this. Then what happens is they say, specifically, pot herbs, cucumbers, garlics, lentils, and onions. Now, does this sound like things that Israelis eat? Do Israelis eat lentils, cucumbers, garlics, onions, and pot herbs? Or do these sound like ingredients that you might see in a curry? Like a Muslim type dish? Another clue from Allah that this is describing his people in the Dark Ages, because we know in the Dark Ages, the Muslims, the Arabs, would have been eating things with pot herbs, cucumbers, garlics, lentils, and onions. That's basically a masala that he's just described there. And the Jews didn't eat that. The Jews didn't eat anything like that. But anyway, then he says, will you exchange the better for the worse? So Moses is saying to them, would you take the same things if I just gave you better lentils, better cucumbers, better onions? Because you're just not happy with the ones you got. Do you want better stuff than you've already got? And they were covered with humiliation and misery when he said, go down to another town then and find what you want. So we know this is not what the Israelites do, Allah. For a start, the Israelites have just escaped slavery, like a few years ago. They got away with Moses and they were escaping your place. And in your place, when they were slaves, what they were growing for you, O Arab slave masters, they were growing lentils, pot herbs, cucumbers, onions, and garlics. That is what they would have been doing as slaves, growing those things for your Egyptians. So now they've escaped across the Dead Sea with Moses and set up Israel in the middle of the desert. Most of their diet is going to be meat, isn't it? Because they haven't farmed the land yet. They've only just got there. And I can tell you, it takes more than 2 years to successfully Arabalize a desert into farmland. It takes like a decade at least. And then you need 3 or 4 years to cultivate the plants. So this is actually historically and scientifically inaccurate. What Allah has done is made the mistake of thinking the food sources that he had in the Dark Ages when he was writing this were freely available in Israel at the time this was supposedly written. And that's just not the case because they were in a desert. So they had sheep, i.e. shepherd flocks of lamb, i.e. Passover lamb, which we know that's what they had. And that is the mainstay of what they were eating. And we know that from the Old Testament. So we know that's wrong. But anyway, we carry on to, will you exchange better for worse? So Moses is bemoaning the Jews, saying, look, if I give you the same food but just better, bigger ones, will you be happy? And then he says, why don't you go to another town and find them? And this is another thing we know to be false. Moses at no point says to the Israelites, now that you've slaved away to build this town in the desert, Israel, with a big wall around it, and it's doing really well, go into other towns and try and get food from them. That never happens. They pray to God and God gives them what they want. And in fact, to this very day, they export a lot of food. They barely have any imports at all. They don't take food off anyone else. They were covered with humiliation and misery. They drew themselves on the wrath of Allah. Thought you said they'd already drawn your wrath, Allah. So are we supposed to think Allah is like a dumped ex-girlfriend or something? Like 1 minute he's like, yeah, I'll kill them. Then he's like, go with my blessing. Then he's like, I'll kill them. And he's like, yeah, I'll give you food if you just ask for it nicely. I'll kill you. Allah can't make his mind up which part of time he's discussing and how he feels about the Israelites. But as I always say, judge a person on what they do, not on what they say about what they do. So we can dispense with everything Allah says in this page and refer back to the Egypt Moses story when he stands on the seashore and says, and I quote, "You filthy ape Jews, I will kill you all, I will burn Israel, this is my prophecy. And my justice upon you Jews will be swift." That's what he actually does. Now because they've escaped, he doesn't have any power over them. He's trying to make excuses to say what they're doing now is actually part of my plan. Secret agent Allah, too smart for those guys. Knowing full well, because he's in the Dark Ages now, since this time to the Dark Ages, Israel have gotten bigger and bigger and bigger and stronger and more wealthy, and they're doing flipping amazing because of their God, not because of Allah. So Allah trying to take the credit for all that, while talking to his poverty-stricken warlike Muslims in the Dark Ages. And then the last thing he says is, this is because they went on rejecting the signs of Allah and slaying his messengers without cause. Now we know they don't start slaying the messengers of Allah until much later in the timeline. In fact, the first messenger that gets slain is Muhammad in 532 AD. So once again, put those little clues together. Allah is saying they kept on slaying our messengers without cause. According to Allah, without cause means if you're a slave and you kill your master and run away, that's murder, that's without cause. And that is how Muhammad died. We know from this book again, and the hadiths. Muhammad had a Jewish slave girl that he pillaged from one of the towns, then ran away and hid in a little tunnel. And she got pretty annoyed with him being a pervert and being a disgusting evil man, so she poisoned him and then ran away. She prayed to God, poisoned him, ran away and was free. That's how the prophet was slain. Like, everyone agrees that in history. So that's what he's talking about here when he says they kept slaying our prophets without cause. But we haven't done that yet, Allah. We're still in 800 BC or 700 BC. No, Christ hasn't happened yet. You know, we haven't had anything like that. So we know Allah can't tell the time, or he can tell the time, and he's just lying to us. You make up your own mind. I personally think he can tell the time and he's just lying because he wants to conserve what shreds of his dignity remain after having been busted as someone who does bad prophecies, gives bad advice and gets roundly beaten by a bunch of ex-slave Jewish guys with no weapons when he claims to be a great merciful God. No, he's not. He's just a fraud. Then the last thing. This is because they rebelled and went on transgressing. So, end of reading. What he's talking about there, they rebelled means they didn't want to be slaves in Egypt. They didn't want to worship Allah. They wanted to keep their own customs and their own God and their own Ark of the Covenant. As they were travelling through Egypt before they were slaves, they already had. So again, he's saying they already had a God and a book before they met him. Now he's saying that book is bad because Moses changed it. And it's like, well, when exactly did Moses get a chance to change this book? Oh, Allah, were wise and merciful, because as far as we know, in your own words, Allah, you came across the Hebrews passing through the desert, captured them all as slaves, put them to hard work, killed their firstborn sons and let their women live. That's your own description. So they were slaves during that period. When did they get a chance to do this book writing exactly? Exactly, they haven't. So now they're in Israel, and you're saying they're concerning themselves with foods. There's no mention of them doing any writings. So Allah, once again, trips himself up in his own garbage and lies, and lets us know Moses already had a book that was accurate and was from God. Allah doesn't like it and wants to say Moses wrote it, so it must be wrong, even though he claims that Moses was his prophet. And now he's guiding Moses and Allah are actually the reason that Israel are doing really well. But then he describes them having Muslim-type food, even though they're in the desert and they don't have any farms yet. They've only got sheep. So all in all, we know this book is full of nonsense. The conclusion of this short video is Allah is full of rubbish, can actually tell the time despite the fact that his writings are virtually illegible. And the reason he's making so many mistakes is because he really wants you to believe in Allah. Worship Allah, guys, not God. God's not real. course it's not real. Allah Moses isn't real. None of these guys know anything. It's Allah. Please believe me. You got to believe me. Trust me, bro, is what Allah says in the book. But we don't trust you, bro. We know you are full of nonsense. Your book is garbage and evil. And your cult of Islam is slowly dwindling towards insecurity and irrelevance because of this book. And your lies, Allah. And that's the end of this video. So, I hope you enjoyed that and you learned something. God bless you all. And I'll see you lovely people in the next one. Allah Akbar! Oh, is it the Gala? Gala Akbar! So that'll just about do it for today. If you'd like to catch up with more Without Lies, Islam Dies, the exploits of Allah the Gala, then catch up with me here tomorrow and we'll do some more Quran reading then. So in the meantime, God bless you all, have a lovely evening, and I'll see you lovely people in the next one. Bye!